Wominjaka, kia ora. Hello, my name is Jen Cloher. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I'm a guest and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Even though sovereignty hasn't been ceded by the colony, this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm joined today by three friends, collaborators to some extent, I think. I hope to be collaborating with them more. I'm going to introduce them with their bios so they sound as impressive as they are, because otherwise I'm just going to be like, me old mate Marcelle, which I think they all deserve proper introduction. So I'd like to start with Samuel Gaskin, creator and change agent. Love that, change agent. Samuel Gaskin has always been one to stand out in a crowd, true that. Not only is he an accomplished artist and actor, he also runs his own company, Beat Entertainment, which specialises in bespoke creative solutions. His work Reckoning, which we'll be talking about a lot today, recently took out 4 Melbourne Fringe Awards. On top of his creative pursuits, Samuel is also a passionate activist for diversity and inclusion in the music industry. Next to Samuel is Marcel Bradbeer, a Melbourne-based freelance photographer focusing on landscape photography, but I think also in the last few years more and more portrait photography. And we'll be looking at some of Marcel's work today. Bradbeer. Marcelle is a graduate of the Bachelor of Fine Art Photography at RMIT University. She was selected amongst 10 emerging Melbourne artists to exhibit her work in the Cycle & Co Australian Art Project in 2018 and invited to take part in the Hillvale Stitch Up Machine Group show at the Independent Photography Festival in 2016. Sorry, this is probably sounding a little bit in the past. Marcelle has also moved into, working as a video maker and filmmaker, and we'll be looking at and talking about a lot of her recent work today. And we also have Simona Castricum, an independent solo artist, one half of the duo SAD or SAD.
SAD.
SAD,
whatever
SAD.
You want to be. Simona and Daphne.
An underground DJ. She also runs 100% independent record label Trans Brunswick Express, greatest name ever. As an educator and PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne, her work explores queer intersections in architecture, music, the city and public space. Simona is a community radio broadcaster at 3RRR Melbourne. Perhaps, is that a little bit in the past? Is that still going on and I don't know about it?
No, I'm still doing it.
Okay. And an associate of Parlour Women Equity Architecture. Anyway, we got through that.
Clap or something.
Basically, I'm sitting here with 3 fabulous legends. And we're going to be talking about, first of all, this feels really formal and weird. I'm just going to say it. Sitting behind a glass box with full-on microphones and headphones with you in a kind of fishbowl vibe. So it is slightly weird. I'm going to get used to it, but I do feel like weirdly nervous. But that's going to chill out once I get into this presentation. So what I thought was, this topic is about developing your personal brand, coordinating a tour, finding a label, and self-managing and releasing, which is like, honestly, we could spend a whole day talking to one of those areas. And I think what would be most useful today, because I'd rather go in depth into one of those areas rather than just do some fluffy thing that you walk away and go, oh, okay, well, that was really not useful. I want you to take away some useful things that you can go and implement in your own career. And I think that the developing your personal band and brand is really interesting. because it's such a visual world that we live in today, and the visual aspect of releasing music is so important. And I also think that this is a place that all three of these artists, it's a real strength and they have a lot to say about it. So I want to focus on that. We might get to some of the other things later on, but my feeling is we're going to do a deep dive into the idea of personal band brand. We're getting some thumbs up from the back. Sick, thank you. Loving the feedback. Feel free. Yeah. Love some hand signals.
Nice, just like thumbs up. It gets rid of the glass.
None of this though.
I love that too. Yeah.
I guess before I start asking questions of my guests here today, I wanted to just talk about my own experience. I have always cringed at the idea of a brand. Somehow I thought it was separate to making art, that branding meant commercial, meant selling out, meant not being yourself, like some kind of artifice. And I've really struggled with it. I've really struggled with the idea of my image and projecting an image out into the world. And I think particularly earlier in my career, when I had no idea who I was, it was even more confusing. So I just did things that I thought looked cool, like they weren't actually coming from a place of feeling connected to the idea of the image. So I was like, this is me trying to be cool. This is me projecting something that I think you want to see. And I don't think there's much power in that. Like, you can only get away with that for so long until people start to see through it. And I feel like maybe in the last sort of 10 years, so I've been around for a while, but maybe in the last 10 years, as I've started to feel more comfortable about all aspects of my identity, I feel less and less kind of concerned about what other people think. And so now I'm creating work and putting imagery out there that I feel really connected to without this worry of what will they think though. And I think that's something that I often say to artists when they come into name dropping, I manage my music, is like, just be who you are. And if you don't know who that is yet, that's okay, be honest about it, because I think that people really connect to the honesty. And within that, I also want to say that being who you are doesn't mean that you can't create characters and worlds and you can create a name. You know, you don't have to be Jen Cloher. You know, like you could be, you know, whatever it is, Hutchiku, or it might be a dream sort of idea of self. But as long as there's a connection to that story that you're telling. And I think, you know, often people are criticised for hiding behind creating personas, but I don't agree. I think some people do that beautifully and I connect with it just as much. So, yeah, I just want to say this isn't about being boring. Not that being yourself is boring. I don't think I'm boring. So anyway, I'm going to move into some questions. And I'm going to start by asking you, Simona. I guess I just wanted to start, and we have some visual images here as well, but I'm just going to do that so you can see it a bit more clearly, because everyone can see it out there on the screen. I just wanted to ask you, like, what does personal brand mean to you?
Oh, well, you know, personal brand, I think, you know, it's just... like there are so many different things that constitute that, particularly if I'm, you know, if you're a musician. I mean, like for me, like, I mean, like growing up in the 80s, like you know, it was about the album sleeve. And it was like, you know, when you're like 6 years old and you've got a 12-inch you've got a 12-inch record sleeve, like it's a pretty big thing. But there's also like all this text on it, and like there's no internet or anything. And it was just like, I just like read all the liner notes.
Do you remember your first Obsession vinyl, like one that you listened to and looked at? all the time?
Oh, like I mean, the first record I ever bought was like the Human League Dare in like 1981.
That's cool. You're so much cooler than me.
Yeah, mine's shame.
I bought it at Brash's. Yeah. Anyway, if anyone remembers Brash's.
I remember Brash's.
Yeah. So I guess like so growing up through that time, I was just like obsessed with album covers, and I was obsessed with like how album covers articulated not only like something about the artist, but also like something about the music. And you know, so these slides I've got up, I think are sort of like some of the things that, you know, like, you know, with New Order, there's like New Order Substance, and I was looking at that, the amazing thing about New Order was that they never really put their faces on the cover that much. They were sort of like this faceless band, and they were sort of their branding through Factory Records and through Peter Saville and photographers like Trevor Key. You know, they would use photography. They would use photography. They would use typography. They would use color. They would, you know, and really just sort of like fuck with like classical ideas. So like, you know, I became like basically I taught myself graphic design, and you know, through like just looking at New Order record covers, and taught myself like Photoshop in my own head before I even knew that it existed. So like for me, you know, like New Order was a really big influence, but then also like Depeche Mode and all that sort of stuff as well as sort of like, you know, like narratives and stuff. And then, yeah, and then just sort of like through the 90s, again, things changed, relationships back to magazines. There was this relationship called Ray Gun, which like Vaughan Oliver from, you know, 4AD kind of like did and stuff. So that really informed like this idea that like the identity was not just the album cover, it wasn't just the photograph of the band, it was also like the relationship back to the magazine, the relationship back to the media, and who you are as a performer.
That's a really interesting point, because I think in order to understand why we would go about creating a personal brand is getting to the sort of heart of like, why is it important? You know, and what did these brands do for you? Like, it sounds like you were having an emotional, physical response, yeah?
But most of these artists were like hiding. They weren't showing their face. And then, like, I guess, like, as we move through, like, if the question is, like, who do I think does it well, you know, I think, like, you know, if I'm looking at, like, sort of 2010s artists that really inspire me, it's like Zola Jesus or Anthony Hegarty, and there's, like, this amazing relationship to their sleeves, to their photography, but also to their performance, and that was something that I wanted to embody, but even, like, the typography that they would use. So there was this really beautifully curated image. But also it was like the audience and the person purchasing it was a treat for them too. Like the object is really beautiful. I think that's something that we kind of like we've lost a bit, is the object. So I guess they were just my formative inspirations for where I went.
And how have you gone about, I mean, as Simona, with your own work, like what aspects of these inspirations have you sort of brought into your own work? Well,
the interesting thing is, like, when we look at, say, like, you know, like New Order or Cocteau Twins or, you know, like Pixies or anything like that, they were faceless. But then it was like, you know, I remember, like, so with this slide up, you know, it's like, you know, this, you know, there's the Trouble in Utopia one, and that's sort of like my first record, you know, and it's just like I just was owning my own identity, you know, as a musician, and you know, and also as a trans woman as well, I think too. But so it's almost like Trouble in Utopia is like I'm coming out, you know, and I'm holding these flowers.
Where are you coming out from though? It looks quite industrial. Like.
Yeah, it's like a concrete plant room on top of my old architecture work, you know, on the top of a car park in Flinders Lane. It's amazing. It's the most amazing space. And then, like, the next one is, like, the black one of, like, Still. I remember, so you were talking about before of, like, you know, putting my face on a cover. I just felt like the biggest fuckwit because I was just like, you know, like, so the still poster, like, you know, back in those days, like, you'd do, like, a poster run around town. And I remember, like, having at work, you know, 100... I opened up the PDF with the A0s, black and white, and I was going to send it to the plan printer at work. And, like, I'm just, like, I'm like, what sort of a dickhead presses print on 100 copies of their own face at A0 and then puts them in the boot of the car and takes them to Placket or Rock Posters and gets them put up all over their local neighbourhood? Like, what sort of a dickhead does that? And I'm going, like, I'm aching, I can't press the button. And then, like, a guy comes over from work and he's just like, oh, I love the poster. And I'm like, and I said that to him, and he said back to me, he goes, oh, no, everyone loves a face. And I was like, oh, cool, all right. And then I did it, and I haven't looked back, and now my face is on everything. You know, and it's the complete antithesis of what I learnt from New Order or what I learnt from wherever. But it turns out, like, the front cover is, like, my face and the back cover is the typography.
Well, it's such a beautiful thing for him to have said, because it's so true. Like, you know, we're humans.
Super true.
We love looking at each other, you know.
Yeah.
Like, we're, you know, primates that can't get enough of our own features.
Yeah, and also, like, you know, a lot of what I do, like, you know, like, trans visibility is important. You know, like, trans people are completely written out of history, or they're written out of wherever, and it's like, it's, you know, we have had to, like, sort of, like, write ourselves, or, you know, put ourselves into, you know, some kind of history, I guess.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I just wanted to own my face. But it was a really great way of, like, self-acceptance and self-love as well.
I think it's really brave to put yourself on an album cover, because so often I'm repulsed by my own face, and I'll get photos back and I'll be like, it's so disappointing that I don't look nearly as hot as I do in my mind, you know. And I've often had this thing of, like, thinking it's going really well, and then, like, looking at the proofs and going, wow. And just feeling so often, like, I don't know if anyone relates to this, I'm just going to be really honest. Like, you look at yourself in the mirror, pull a few faces and go, you're a babe. And then you go and do a photo shoot and you're like, where did that person go? You know, and I'm not even sure to this day if anyone has ever captured me in a way that feels like me. Maybe that's got more to say about my own journey, but it is really brave, I think, to make that choice as an artist, to put, you really are putting yourself out there.
Well, there's some photographers that have worked with me, like, you know, like Alex Dubois, who did all of the photography for Panic Desire, which is the last slide, you know, like, just completely nailed the brief, like, you know, like, straight away. But others have just, like, because I can relax around those people, I don't just, like, hold all of this, because I hold all my stress in my jaw. And so as soon as that comes out, it's like, we go, relax your jaw. I'm like, no, but I'm hyper vigilant.
I think there's also strength in vulnerability as well, which comes across with having a face on a cover as well, and, like, owning your identity. And people are drawn to that, I think, quite often.
Well, that's true, and I think that's a great segue, Marcel, because I wanted to talk with you about some of the fantastic work that you've been doing recently. And I guess over the last 4 years, I mean, you've been working at Milk, so you've seen a lot of stuff come in.
Yep.
But you've also been working closely with your partner, Annika Ostendorf, aka Hutchiku. And I think really on Hutchiku's debut album, I'll Probably Be Asleep, which came out, I think, late last year, I think everything really stepped up visually for Hutchiku. Visually, the quality of the visual collateral, a term that I stole from you, Simona, when you came in and spoke and I managed my music workshop a few years ago. I was like, visual collateral. Yeah. Whoa, I love that. The visual collateral, which, you know, album cover, photos, clips, all of that stuff, I guess, that tells the story. I just thought, we're of a really high standard. And I think I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about that process. But what I enjoyed with seeing that album campaign roll out, and it's worth just going to the Hachaku Instagram after this workshop to have a scroll through and just see how consistent it's been. And I think that consistency is very much part of the personal brand. You're selling an album, you're selling a performance, and how does that look to someone who's checking it out? But something that I really loved, because Hachaku's music feels quite dreamlike, there was something about the photography and the clips that had this, I guess, like hyper reality. Like it was very Arnica, but somehow placed in a world that wasn't every day. And I wanted to just start by asking you, like, was there a conversation that you had sitting down with Arnica that sort of shaped the direction that you took, or was it more like along the way?
Well, with the album cover, one thing I can say about Arnica is that she loves certain colours. So that was sort of a guideline. Red, blue, and some green, which...
This isn't the album cover, by the way. I'm projecting the first...
Cool.
Well, was it the first single, Shark Attack?
Yeah, that was the first single. So that was actually taken alongside the film.
Sorry.
Feature puppy moment.
Not interested in Arnica, just getting a close-up of the dog.
That was taken alongside the film clip. So I think it's quite... speaking about brands and identities and having a consistency on social media, wherever it may be, I find it's quite good to have like a really sharp photo or a press shot that goes alongside the film clip. So that was actually on the same day as a film clip, which features that whole vibe.
Do we have the film clip here as well? Should I...
in a link somewhere.
I'll just go to the links.
Oh, actually, I don't know if the Shark Attack one was in a...
Here it is.
Oh, okay.
You can watch a little bit of this. I'm not sure if you're going to get the audio out there, but you can certainly... So there you go. There's the hero image.
Yeah. So I think that ties in to it. So you've kind of end up having this linear narrative going through, and then it rolls into the next single and the next single. So
where did you find those glasses? They're just like magnified. I mean, those are choices as well, like going with these crazy glasses that make Arnica's eyes 5 times bigger or something.
I think that was an op shop in
so good.
Savers or Salvation. I can't remember. There was a lot of just finding props and like that phone and all the clothing, the slippers. Like I think sometimes with film clips and photos, if it's done well, you don't notice how much effort is put into everything involved, like the clothes, the lighting, the angles, the cuts, because there's so much process that leads to the final product. And I think people watch and they go, oh yeah, that was great. They don't realise there was like a whole team that went into finding a needle or fake blood that looked realistic.
And there's you.
Yeah, that's me.
That's you, the Nurse Ratchet.
Yeah.
Who comes to... What do you do?
Cold.
Do you actually kill Arnica? Is that your role, or are you just there to...
Now, the narrative... So the song itself is about Arnica's dog passing away and, like, coming to terms with that. So the film clip leads, as you can see, to Wags being put down in a really dark way. And so...
I never got that for some reason. I thought you were like there to get Arnica.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad and really beautiful.
So I think with the whole sort of campaign around the shark attack single, we wanted to have lots of press shots that linked to that film clip. So there was one of Arnika wearing the wig, the one with her and Wags, the one with the slime. So it all ties into the narrative.
They're so crisp. Like, they're such a pleasure. Like, just great photos, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, is to really go for the best, you know, that you can. Because I know often, and when I say go for the best that you can, I'm not saying spend a lot of money, but really think about it. Like, spend some time thinking about the visual world of what you're creating. Because I think in a way, and I'll be asking you some more questions in a sec, Marcel, I think in a way, branding to me is about inviting someone in to the story. And I think often you don't need to sell something if you already have an audience who are intrigued. It's kind of like attraction, not promotion. That's my sort of vibe around it, is like, I don't want a hard sell. I don't want something forced down my throat. But I love it when, you know, artists have this way of seducing me, essentially. It's a seduction, you know, like, oh, here's a little bit of what I'm doing. And then I might go and listen to the music. And I think in a weird way, we do live in a world where the visual can be what makes us go and listen to the music or makes us go and see the show. So it's just so important, and why I wanted to sort of talk about it in such depth today, because I think it's one of the most important things about making work, you know. But keep going, Marcel. Yeah. I've also got specific questions here if I'm like bleeding you dry.
No, I agree. Like, I think that, well, I definitely judge an album by its cover. And sometimes it's misleading.
Well, speaking of which, I want to talk a little bit about this album cover, because for me it was the album cover of the year. I just thought it was fantastic. So beautifully rendered, and I think on the back of it's really great too. So you've just got the back of Annika's head, with the track listing, and just even that thought of like, well, let's make it back to front, you know, little details like that. But I know
typography is so important. As Simona was saying, I think it's like totally overlooked a lot of the time. Like, it can, like Sebi did a lot of the graphics around the album cover, but just anyone who uses typography or fonts to make a work that's two-dimensional come across three-dimensional as well.
Well, that's really interesting, as well as the way that you've framed that image, so that you have the border of the album, the dual lines of green and reddy colour. But then Annika's kind of sitting in front. Yeah. So it has this sense of really coming out, again, this sort of hyper-reality.
Well, it plays into the depth of field, I think, as well, because you start to have the soft out of focus area around her hair, and then having a font that, I mean, it could be at the same distance as her, but for some reason it creates this depth because of those lines placed behind her. And I've seen posters, you know, where font is semi-obstructed by the person in the photo, and just even choices of what fonts are used or what colours, because that all ties into the whole like brand and image around a campaign as well.
Well, I just wanted to show
that was a reference shot
that you used to reference, and I love it. You know, like, I think that famous saying, you know, good artists borrow, great artists steal. You know, and just taking good ideas and changing them up and bringing, you know, your own sort of thing to it.
Yeah, well, Annika really liked that shot, and she really wanted it to look quite like that, and to have a kind of like aged cover in a way, but then also making it a bit more current and hyper real, which played into like all the other past images as well, and almost like a little bit painterly, but with that, I think also, as Simona was saying before, vinyl or art, when you have an actual LP printed and pressed, it is like its own artwork as well. And I think the other thing that really played into that was having that album cover printed on a sort of matte paper, because then it feeds into that whole sort of more vintage visual, like you've got texture which is similar to the background, and if it's glossy then it might contradict what you're trying to like get across. So all those things tie in, like typography, your paper you're using, like the print.
Yeah, it's all part of that visual. Well, it has an aesthetic, but it's also something you're going to hold.
Tactile as well.
Merchandise.
Yeah.
If we have time, I want to come back and talk a little bit about another artist that you felt had a really great approach to their campaign. But just watching time, we're at nearly at 11:45. That's how we've only just touched on visual branding, folks. So I just want to move along so that we get to hear from Samuel. And I think what is interesting about Samuel, and perhaps just a sort of slightly different approach, is that you, I guess, you self-produced and funded a show last year called Reckoning, and it had its debut at Melbourne Fringe.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like a whole sort of production with a cast, and it's a stage show. So it's less about here's the album, listen to the music, and I guess it's more about buy tickets, come to the show. And I guess like what I sort of wanted to first ask you was, what was your process of coming to understand and see what the visual story of Reckoning was? Because I think you succeeded, but what was your process?
Oh, well, to be honest, we created Reckoning in 2020, so it was amidst the pandemic. So let me tell you, a lot of my process was letting go of control and things needing to be a certain way. For instance, we had a brilliant concept for a photo shoot with Michelle Hunda, and we were all trapped in lockdown, so that couldn't happen. And so we then needed to come up with a way to get that image without being able to get to a studio, with us all the cast being separate. So we literally all had to take a photo of ourselves and get a brilliant graphic designer on board called Robert Panas, and get him to really build what we wanted that visual and that image to be. And the coolest thing about, I think, 2020 was having to let go of it needing to be a particular way. I feel like the image turned out exactly the way it was supposed to. Thank you, ancestors. And that just worked really well.
Well, also, it seems that you've made the choice to have, I guess, like the colours that we'd see on the Māori sovereignty flag, Tino Rangatiratanga.
Very
so
much
you've
so.
got your black, your white and your red. That's really lovely, subtle kind of sense of Māoridom, yeah?
Yeah, and the circle was really important to me because circle is a really strong shape in a lot of Indigenous cultures. We meet in circle. I just think it's got a really powerful energy to it. So it was really important that we had that in the mix. And the show, I mean, we tackle some pretty full-on themes. I mean...
Shall we watch the the clip
Yeah, why not?
for the show? Because
Yeah.
it was one of, I think, 3 shows that was chosen as like one of the faces of the Fringe. So you got it shot at Hamer Hall.
Yeah,
With
that
all
was
the
cool.
production. I was like, way to go with your first ever stage production. And in a weird way, you know, we were sort of talking about it as it was all rolling out. It was kind of great because you've got this visual collateral that you can then take to other festivals and, you know, it's this high-end production. And I guess also just with the before we move on, the font, and what's this little guy on top of the O? What do we call that?
That little macron is something that's, it's prominent when you see Māori writing. So while it actually doesn't make sense in terms of pronunciation, it was really important to put that in there because...
It's branding. It
yeah.
brands it as, I guess, a production that's going to look at Māori tikanga.
Absolutely.
And what does this mean here?
So, Te Waiata Pai Here Wairua means the sounds of woven souls.
Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, and the heart of the show is really the weaving of Māori and Aboriginal culture. So that just felt right and perfect and beautiful. And I need to give a shout out to Paula Barbie, who's one of the members of the cast, but also kind of like a cultural advisor who helped me.
I reckon, because I want to talk a bit more, that I'm going to go with the shorter clip.
Cool.
We've got extra time, in which case I'm going to go with the longer clip. So this is the Hamer Hall version.
Yeah.
So it's very early in the piece. I mean, this show has got a lot more funding to be developed and move further along.
Yeah.
But here we go. All right. They can't hear things out there. I think I'm going to go with
The
shorter,
1 minute. Yeah.
just because it could.
What I said was very powerful, just so that you know
my
out there
God.
behind the glass.
What did you say? You were having like your Madonna moment.
I was just giving everyone a shout out for actually getting to the point of being at Hamer Hall and able to put the show on.
Yeah. You're having your Beyonce before we get started.
Yeah.
Very powerful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a really powerful clip there, and I think it gives us a kind of sense of, you know, the look of the show.
Yeah.
So,
Although
can you
the
tell me?
perfectionist in me hates it.
That's
But
always
it does.
the
It
case.
gives you an idea. It gives you an idea.
Well, tell me a little bit about that, like
Well-
having to reconcile your vision with what you were able to do in a week.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, it's that whole letting go thing. So a lot of that was shot when we were teching. Just to give you a little bit of background, we weren't able to rehearse in the same room until a week out from pre-record, and then we were still in lockdown, so you weren't actually allowed to be inside. So we had to find somewhere that was still considered outside to rehearse. So I found like an old tram shed on the beach, and that was the only place that overlapped everybody's 20k radius and all that type of thing. So there was a lot of that in the mix, but a lot of that footage was shot from like tech, so people don't have their full costumes on, which is really does my head in. But we needed something that could sell the show, like also a week out. So I had to let go of that and be okay with some of the shots. Not everybody is
They're
in
not
the full
wearing
shebang,
yeah,
and that's okay,
yeah,
because it still paints the picture.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, this is the first time you've done your own show. Like, you put out music in the past as a recording artist, and I guess, you know, it's a very personal journey. It's your own personal reckoning with your cultural identity. Does it feel odd to speak about a body of work like this within the context of a personal brand? Like, how did you reconcile that or do that?
Yes and no, because I think my journey with my own personal brand has very much been, like you were saying before, when I first started, it was very much like how cool I could be, and how fierce I looked, and as I've grown and gotten a bit older, I think my personal brand now is very much authenticity, being unapologetically black and queer and awesome, and so sharing a story so personal just felt exactly right. And it's also funny that that's what's connected, and that's what's hit the hardest of everything I've done.
That's interesting as well. Like, when I watched the show, when it was live streamed as part of Fringe, your connection to the narrative and that story and your integrity was the bright shining light. Like, the costumes and the dancers and the other performers kind of just faded into the background because of your because it was so personal, you know.
Thank you.
So I think in a way, you know, like, there's something, I know for myself, I don't know if you all feel the same way, but when there is that emotional connection, to go out on a stage is much easier because I'm communicating something with you, you know, rather than just an idea. I'm communicating an aspect of myself. So I think you did that really well.
Thanks, Cuz.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess, was there anything else anyone wanted to say about this particular area? Because we can go for another 20 minutes. I can move on, or we can just keep going deeper in. So I'll start with you, Simona. Was there anything more you wanted to kind of talk about in regard to this?
No, I don't believe so. I think
Fab.
No, I think everyone's said some fabulous stuff.
Yeah, great. Marcelle, what about yourself? Was there anything more that you felt you wanted to talk about?
I agree. Sorry, that sounded like disagree. I agree with the whole, the more you know yourself, I can't speak as an artist, like as the person who's having the photo taken or anything, but on the other end of it, it makes it a lot easier working with people when they know themselves a lot more, because I think that authenticity comes across a lot more, and it feels less forced, like you're trying on a costume that's not yours. And I think that people pick up on that a lot more. And I don't know if that's just like maybe as you get older and you get more self-assured that it naturally evolves like that, or maybe some people just know themselves a lot more than others. But it definitely makes the whole process a lot easier when you're not trying to be something that you're not, because I think it's not as captivating sometimes.
Yeah. What do you think Annika's strengths are? Like, you obviously worked with those strengths. What do you think, her strengths are as an artist in that way?
Well, I think Annika's has evolved when we've collaborated for years, and when we first were taking photos and doing covers and stuff, it was a lot more difficult because she wasn't quite sure of like where she sat in terms of genre, and also just her own identity as a new artist as well. I think because you have that pressure as a new artist to like have this really strong vision and brand from the get-go, and I think a lot of the time that doesn't happen instantly. It's the whole progression, and sometimes that takes years.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess, like, one of my mantras is, like, you don't know what you know, and you don't know what you're doing until you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, like, something that I sort of, like, picked up from architecture, I guess. It's just, like, when you're writing an album or, and you're imagining sort of what that looks like, and what the videos are going to be, and yes, all of this sort of like visual collateral assets, if you like. Those things, just sort of like come, when they're ready. So this idea of like having a strong vision and making everything fit that vision is, for me, it's just kind of like, like, I don't know, I feel like the vision's there, so to speak, but I let it I let it manifest without anything like super stringent on what that has to be. I don't have my mind made up, before it all. Otherwise, it's just not possible to achieve what you're trying to do. And there's just some spontaneity to that, and the own, like, I guess, sort of like personal growth.
And I think, like, the more you just sort of make stuff and release stuff and create, like, visual brands, sometimes it might not work, sometimes it might, and then it starts to naturally evolve into what fits with you more as well. And sometimes that process helps working backwards, or, like, not so much in terms of art, like musicians and stuff, but I know when I was studying photography, quite often they would give you a brief or a project, and they'd be like, come up with a concept and a theme and an idea straight away and work towards that. And that process didn't fit right with me, and instead I just end up taking photos and doing stuff, and then I'd look back on everything and I'd be like, oh, okay, there's actually a theme here that I wasn't aware of, that I can now see, and then I'd take that and then I'd work on that. And so it's kind of working backwards in a way, instead of sitting down being like, what's my theme, what's my brand or something, just like taking lots of photos or videos or just trying to feel what's right. And then if you look back on it and you reflect, then some things start to resonate with you, and then you take that and you grow from that.
That's a great point. It's kind of like a mood board almost. Like, did you sort of have a process, Samuel, with, slowly getting a sense of what Reckoning was visually?
Yeah, absolutely. We love a mood board.
Same.
We love a mood board. And essentially, like, I work really closely with my partner, Johnny, who's great at making everything look beautiful. So we'll do like a brain dump of like fonts we like, imagery we like, even just, some words and bits and pieces, and we get it out there on a piece of paper or on the computer or whatever, and it really helps kind of pick and choose what will go nicely together, especially for me too, because Johnny and I always fight because he explains things to me, and as he's explaining, I don't get it because I need to see what it looks like. in front of me. So it's really helpful for me to have that visual, as messy as it may be, just there so that we can then piece together what the final product is actually going to look like.
And it makes it so much easier for the person taking the photos or the videos or whatever it may be, the graphic designer, if you have some references, like Simona's thing was a perfect movie. I was like, yes.
Visual references, but, it's like, in architecture it was always like, talk to a drawing. Like, don't sit down and explain an idea to me without a drawing. It's like, cool, so it's just, and if you don't have that visual reference material, you're just sort of reading other people's minds, But, like, the other thing too is, like, like reinventing the wheel, like, big deal, like, I was just like, like, take it from wherever,
Yeah.
But, like, the other thing is too, like, no one can be you, like, you just, like, do your own thing, and, like, if you want to, like, do your own version of, like, Led Zeppelin 4, do it, but, like, that's on you too.
I think that's beautifully said, and, such a great...
But I've, like, literally ripped off New Order videos. Too, and many people, like, I think that's a thing, like, that, like, people do, like, literally rip off other people's videos, like, for a cack,
Right. Yeah, and
like,
sometimes just
lols.
not. Like, I don't know whether you and I were looking at a clip where someone had literally ripped off an indie clip and made it was one of my clips, and they'd made it into a car advert. Do you remember that? Was that you and I?
I'm not sure.
I'd made this clip. It wasn't like a highly original idea in the first place, so joke's on them, where paint was dripping down all of my band members' faces. And then I saw these billboards around Melbourne of, like, paint dripping down people's faces in the same colours. And I was like, wow, someone just totally saw my clip and stole it and ran with it. And I was like, oh, awesome. Like, clearly
compliment.
It's met a much wider audience. But I think just one thing that I did want to kind of touch on there is, like, if you do take something practical away today, what was just talked about there is, like, visual references, finding things, not being frightened of borrowing and building on, because we're all magpies, like, every artist has been influenced by someone before them. It's the kind of ancestry of creation, the kind of, like, individualistic, egotistical idea that you had some sort of genius idea and was never influenced by anything around you is silly, And I think when I first started making music and things, like, I thought that's what I had to aspire to, like recreating the wheel. And I think another point that was made that's really beautiful is that more gentle idea of, like, ever evolving and not having to get it perfect, and not, like, it's okay to, like, not know who you are or feel a bit vague or have a photo shoot that didn't go well, and it's really more about what you learn from that process and take forward. So not being hard on yourself, because I think the harder we are on ourselves, the less likely we are to keep making and creating.
And not being perfectionists too, because when Samuel was talking about watching back on that clip and seeing all the things wrong with it, I think we can all relate to that.
What
I
about,
definitely
like,
watched
14 typos on your gatefold album sleeve?
Yeah. Did that happen?
Whoopsie. Yeah, and one of the reference images for that Reckoning image you see there, one of the things on the mood board originally, speaking of borrowing things, was, that iconic Queen album, where kind of their faces are, like, floating. So that was on the mood board.
And it's great because I don't look at that and go, oh, how about that Queen album? But it's helped you.
Well, they didn't have a fierce circle or childhood images in red behind them.
I just have a mood board of Helmut Newton photos and Anton Corbijn photos of like all my favourite sort of like stars of the 80s. You know?
Well, I kind of feel that, you know, let's just bring this back to me because I haven't really had a chance to talk about myself. Go
for it.
Thanks. Because I am an artist as well, okay? I'm not just a facilitator. But, something just sitting here actually today talking with your genius minds is for my next album, I'm really going to go for it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really going to commit.
Lycra.
I'm going to commit
I fully support this.
to not being frightened.
Have a hoon.
To not being frightened because I don't think I've ever gone into... And when I say frightened, I'll be frightened because I'm always frightened. That's just me creating, scared. But feeling the fear and doing it anyway. But truly that, you know, is like having that experience as an artist to just go unapologetically, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, like I did an interview recently with Enola, who was photographed by Alex Dubois, who photographed me as well, and who's photographed like a heap of like queer people around Melbs. And they were talking about that very thing of just sort of like the great thing about that photo shoot was that like they felt really comfortable and they could just let themselves like be whatever, and they were like I want to look dirty, I want to look sweaty, I don't want to look perfect, like, you know. And so it was this really amazing set of shots that have like, you know, for an emerging artist to like to sort of like assert themselves, and this is the image. And you should check out the interview. It's pretty good with Enola. It's great.
Simona, Marcel, Samuel, thank you so much for your beautiful insights and experience and knowledge sharing today. I've learnt a lot. I hope you all have too. I want to shout out to the Brunswick Music Festival Small Time Group and Milk Records for putting their minds together and creating space for these conversations. And I think there's a couple more panels like this happening today following on, so stick around because I think they're going to be really great.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.